And now,
ladies and gentlemen,
please fasten your seatbelts.
Welcome to PreneurCast.
Yeah, business cards being swapped, beers being drunk.
Can I say a nasty word? Can I say procrastination?
With Pete Williams and Dom Gocher.
how well did that go down?
We can talk about that entire thing in a very another rant and soapbox episode if we want to.
Visit us online at PreneurMedia.tv.
Hi, Dom here, and this week I've got another recording for you of a conversation that Pete had with Jordan Pine. Now, Jordan is an expert in short-form direct response advertising for TV. These are the 2-minute advertising spots that you'll see for all manner of products, and it's a fascinating industry. It's a great insight into very, very targeted marketing, very kind of cutthroat, and there's a lot of tips and tricks to pick up. Regardless of the market or the business that you're in, this isn't just about direct response TV ads or even TV ads at all. It's any kind of direct response marketing where you want somebody to react to your message. So this is pretty much applicable to anybody. So just listen out for those tips that are going to work for you in your business, rather than just think, hey, this is just for TV. This is true of any kind of marketing. There's always something that you can learn, always something you can pick up. And this is something that you'll hear Pete and I talk about quite a lot in all of our podcasts, is where we get inspiration from one thing in one industry or for marketing one kind of product, and we can apply it to anything. And that's a great general lesson. And this conversation is an absolute gold mine for those kinds of tips. Just a note about this conversation, there were a few technical difficulties with the recording, so we join Pete further into the conversation just as he's asking Jordan about the more generic aspects of direct response marketing.
But I think at the end of the day, direct response principles are direct response principles. The same stuff that works anywhere still works. You might have to change some of the words and the language you use so it's based on local areas and sort of the way they kind of talk. But the principles of the structure of a direct response piece is fundamentally the same.
Oh yeah, I agree, and I don't think it's changed much in 100 years. When I started in the business, I started going back, and I've always been an avid reader, and I guess it comes with being a writer that most writers like to read a lot as well. So I went back and I looked for pretty much every book that I could find on the topic, and some of these techniques and some of the fundamentals they go back to Claude, Hopkins, and guys that wrote at the turn of the last century,
yep.
1920s, even before that, with regard to print and outdoor advertising and the techniques they were using, and so I read all those books, and I was, it was remarkable to me how much the fundamentals have stayed the same, just obviously changing, the evolving media. Mm-hmm. Has changed, but the fundamentals of how to structure a pitch, how to do what this guy Kennedy called salesmanship. At the time, salesmanship in print, but today salesmanship online or salesmanship in television commercial. How those fundamentals haven't really changed.
I think you're absolutely right. Because so many people kind of start, when the internet came along, started thinking that it's a whole new world out there, and kind of threw out a lot of just common sense business and marketing practices where it's just a different medium, as you alluded to. How did you fall into direct response? How did that sort of come about?
Okay, so I've had about 4 different careers. I started out straight out of high school. I went into the military, so I was a soldier. I served 4 years in the U.S. Army, and then 4 years in the reserves, what we call the National Guard. Mm-hmm. And I used the GI Bill and a program through the National Guard to go to college, Rutgers University in New Jersey. Yep. So I started out, I think a lot of guys coming out of the military probably fancy themselves, that they're going to be, I don't know, hostage rescue or work for the FBI or something. So while I was initially in college, I started working for a private investigation firm that was run by three former FBI agents. Wow. And after I learned what that's all about, I realized that necessarily wasn't the career path for me, because most of what we did was, sit on people's houses and do surveillance, which is boring. Or my favorite was called a trash audit, where you basically you can take someone's trash, because trash put to the curb is in the public, so you're allowed to take it. So we take bags of trash back to the office and sort through it, looking for incriminating documents. I mean, it wasn't glamorous work at all.
So it's actually like
nothing like
movies.
Magnum PI. Yeah, exactly. So I was a criminal justice major for like half a semester, and then I realized that probably wasn't going to be the career path for me. So I got interested in, I said, I'm a writer. I've always liked to write. So I tried journalism. That really stuck. I went to, I basically became the head of the college newspaper and started pursuing journalism as a degree. Eventually graduated with a journalism degree. And this is going to be a bit of a long story. I'll try to make it short. While I was still in college, went to work for a dot-com startup that was self-funded, because they wrote for business publications, special sections in business publications. So I got hired, young kid, there's probably 10 employees, and really grew with the company. Eventually transitioned from writing into marketing. And which was at the time we had one of the first subscription-based models. So we were actually making money on the web, which was unheard of at that time. And of course, after everything blew up, it was still definitely unheard of at that time. So I made the switch from writing into marketing there in a measurable way. It was very measurable. We'd run banner ads, and we'd run promotions, and we could tell what stories were read and what content was resonating with our audiences. So it was sort of an early introduction to DR, although I didn't know at the time. Yeah. And long story short, when I was in marketing, one of my best friend today, who I met in the military, had gone straight out of college into one of the big Asking on TV companies. And, he said, I know a guy who's looking for a marketing person. He'd always told me over the years about this crazy industry and how interesting and full of characters it was. And at the time, I was ready for a change. So I met the guy, and the guy and I really clicked, and I became his director of marketing. And that's how my career in direct response sort of started.
Very, very cool. So I want to pick your brain in a moment about sort of, what makes DRTV work and some elements that way, but you sort of mentioned the crazy characters and stuff. What are some of the silliest products you've actually seen tried to be sold in direct response, sort of short form or long form infomercials?
It's just there are far too many to mention, but for a while there, when social media first came out, a lot of people believed that buzz on YouTube or whatever would translate into sales. So a lot of people pursued not even so much the products themselves, but the creative approach around getting buzz, and then quickly realized that yes, you can get picked up. You can get millions of hits on YouTube. You can even get mentioned in late night and MSNBC stories, but stuff like that. But it's not going to translate into sales. And one of the examples of that was there's an odor spray, an odor eliminator spray that the guy who marketed it chose to call Doc Bottom's A spray, and I'll let you figure out what the A stood for. Okay. And the whole commercial was highly offensive. It was green fog emanating from plumber's cracks and stuff like that, and this guy spraying this spray, and I mean for a while he was a sensation in the social media and late night, and I suggested on my blog at the time that this is not going to work out. People don't buy from clowns, is a old Claude Hopkins line that I use. So he was very upset. Tall guy, by the way. He's a pitchman. I think 6'5", big guy, lifts weights. Confronted me at the annual trade show. Couple sheets to the wind, and got right in my face, and and he started telling me how wrong I was, and I said, well, you've gotten a lot of hits, you say, but have you gotten any sales yet? And he's like, well, we're having trouble converting the traffic into sales. so that was one example of a really silly product that I guess the product itself maybe not so bad, but the marketing approach, and I've seen getting submissions from inventors, which we got a lot of. When I was working for the company that originally hired me, I've seen everything from an avid fisherman submitted a cup holder that attaches to your fishing rod, and he said it could hold your soda, but we know he meant beer. Yeah. That as you cast, it had a hinge so that it would swing with the rod and it wouldn't spill your soda
Okay.
while you were fishing. So, he just thought that up with his buddies on a fishing trip one time. So Mentor stuff would run the gamut. Telebrands, which is a top company in our business, actually tested a very successful catalog item from the senior skewing catalogs, which was a device that helps you wipe your bottom.
Okay.
A long plastic device that you could reach around, I guess, because the elderly or the overweight have difficulty with this. So they actually, to their credit, it was a successful item in some of the catalogs that skew towards seniors, but they put it on TV, and it was everything you might expect that infomercial to be.
Well, how do you pick a good product? Because obviously, if you're getting pitched at times, and obviously there's certain people who are obviously then out researching things like catalogs, like what makes a good product that actually is sellable on TV or in video?
So I have, just focusing on the product itself, I have a list of 7 that I talk about called the Divine 7. But originally, one of the things that I also did when I first came into the business was start to compile, in addition to notes from all the books I read, talking to industry icons, I would compile all these notes into like pilots, checklists, if you will, of things to look for. So I originally started off with, I want to say it was 14 or maybe even 18 items on the checklist for products. And over the years, I've kind of whittled that down. But the Divine 7, is sort of the summary of that. And basically, number one, you want something that solves a problem. And what defines a problem? There's a lot of subjectivity, and people go down the wrong path there. But really, it has to be a fairly painful problem, something that people are wishing they had a solution to. Not an inconvenience, not a nuisance, but the stronger the problem, the more likely the item is to resonate that impulse to buy that we look for. Uniqueness, obviously, if it's already everywhere, people perceive that it's everywhere. They've seen it before. They're not going to call an order now. Yeah. So uniqueness is number 2. These aren't necessarily in order. They're in order of, I'm giving them to you in order of what I think is most important to least, but the Divine 7's in a slightly different order. But anyway, problem solving, uniqueness, mass market. Obviously, a lot of people have tried what are ultimately niche products. If you're a big soccer fan and you put out an item that solves all your soccer kicking problems, that's probably not going to work because most people in the U.S. aren't looking for solution to soccer kicking. The same thing with a lot of golf items. You'll see a lot of golf items that really only maybe there's like one a year that works, and it really only works on the Golf Channel for obvious reasons. But golf in general, though, it's a extremely passionate. The people that play it are passionate about it. It's not a mass market sport, so that I think those people struggle for that reason. You're talking to a narrow and deep audience. So mass market's important. We say one per person would be the holy grail. One per household is the bar for mass market. Okay. At least one per household. Some other things like price right. We found for some strange reason, with limited exceptions, once you get above $20, the impulse dies and people don't call the order now. They start to think about it too much. In recent years, with the Great Recession, really a lot of things were only working at $10 price points. But $20 is sort of the price threshold that we look for. So if you have a more expensive item, you're talking about going into longer formats like half-hour infomercials, or just not for DRTV or direct response at all. And then a couple other minor ones like, easy to explain. I talk about Swiss Army knife products all the time. They do 4, 5, 6, 7 different things, and you just can't cram that all even into a 2-minute commercial in a way that makes sense. And then, age appropriateness, which to me means, these days, if you look at the sweet spot for who buys off of TV, it tends to be people 50 and older, and the boomers and the seniors. So if you have an item that's really young skewing, your odds go to like 1 in 50 from the industry average of, let's say, 1 in 20 or 1 in 10. Yep. And then credibility, over the years I've sort of really softened my thinking on that, because I've seen so many things that I just would not believe would be credible, but people will buy it. So that's a pretty low bar these days. But still there are items that you look at. A lot of times with these You've seen these bracelets that you just put it on and magically it makes you feel better. I think those things, unless they have strong celebrity endorsements and a lot of buzz around them, they're going to struggle on that front, the credibility front.
Yeah, well, those power band things were huge. Not that long ago. I think they were power bands.
The Ionic. Yeah. The what was it called? Ironu bands. Yeah. And that was really tapping into a trend because a lot of sports figures were wearing them and swearing by them. So that helped, but ultimately that one, they're always outliers, and really maybe we can talk about this later. One of the big problems we have in this business is that we always take the one example, and it's irresistible even for the smartest people that I know in the business. You have that one example, that Snuggie or whatever it is, and suddenly everybody's doing blankets you can wear, or bracelets that make your golf swing better, and then you realize that you're just chasing a dream, and it's that 1 in 50 that hit that everybody now thinks is a category, and it's not.
So what are sort of from a consumer perspective, kind of thinking about it, the infomercials and the direct response TV stuff that kind of comes to mind are very much in what I would think of the three categories. I'm sure I'm off this a little bit, but it's obviously weight loss. You've obviously got kitchen utensils, and then you've kind of also got, what was the third one I had? I was thinking about it before, but what would you say that the top sort of categories? Weight loss is big, kitchen utensils is another one. What other sort of stuff is sort of big in that kind of category area?
Yeah, I mean, well, in a general sense, and we really should differentiate between long form and short form when talking about the business. So my main area of expertise is short form, which is 2-minute commercials that air. They do because the media is more efficient, tend to air late night and places like that, but they also air quite frequently during the day, as opposed to infomercial. The true definition of an infomercial is a 30-minute show, and they really only air overnight and Saturday mornings, in the blocks that are set aside for that kind of time. So weight loss is actually across both categories. Many of them have started in long form or they're short form plays that mainly have a retail component. So that and the I guess the complementary fitness category, particularly abs, has been every year or two there's a new ab item. So the fitness items that have to do with weight loss or abs in particular have been a huge category. In short form, pet products. There's been a lot of success generally in the pet product category, everything from de-shedding brushes to even certain toys for pets that solve a problem. Like I worked on one that is basically a cat scratcher, but it also trimmed the cat's claws while they were scratching. It's called Emery Cat. So that was a very successful item. Cat's dog items, obviously the little filing device, the power filing device for the dog's nails was also very successful. So pets has been a pretty strong category, and even strong during the worst periods of the Great Recession, because it's one of those things where pets are like children to the owners, and they will spend in any environment if the solution is right. So pets. Hair removal. Yep. Hair removal of all kinds. Whether it's for women for their legs, or it's we had a whole. When I started in the industry, we launched a product called Finishing Touch, which is a little tiny pen-sized hair remover for women. Then we did a men's version, both of them hugely successful, upwards of 20 million units sold combined, and they still sell. They're still more than 10 years later on the shelf, doing about 1 million units a year. So hair removal has been very successful, and then of course we've had items that follow the more traditional path of an 18 months to 2-year life cycle, like Smooth Away, which is a buffing pad that women rub on their legs, takes the hair off. Anytime you hit a new hair removal solution, that's definitely a hot category. Very cool. And there are many more. Yeah.
You sort of mentioned before about price point, which really intrigues me, because obviously you're saying that $20 or under price point is really important, particularly for short form sort of stuff. Obviously, if you've got that half-hour infomercial, you have the time and ability to build up the argument and the case for the $100 investment or whatever the price point might be. How do the economics work from a very high-level perspective? Is it all about that $20 is fundamentally the cost of acquisition, and then the actual upsells what fund the profit of the venture? And do you get involved in that side of the discussion with the client as well?
So you're asking about the model, how the model works in terms of whether the advertising self-funding or...
Yeah, from a high-level perspective, because I think a lot of people kind of either naive and think that $20 covers the profit in the venture as well, or never actually responded to any sort of direct response television offer and haven't experienced the post promotion process, as in like what happens when you pick up the phone. Like, how do the economics work in a general sort of sense?
Yeah, so the a lot of people when they're new to direct response will look at exactly what you're talking about. How do I get from $19.99 to, an average sale that would even be remotely profitable, particularly with the cost of media these days? And the first thing you have to understand is that we specialize in what we call the back end process of upselling, cross-selling, all those things, which on a typical $10, let's say a $10 buy one get one free offer, which is very common these days, you'll end up with a $50 or $60 average sale. Once you get the person on the phone, you deluxe them, you sell them additionals. There's all kinds of cross sells, related items. So you're talking about initially, on a per order basis, you're talking about a $60 average sale, somewhere in that range. Obviously more if you're starting from a higher price point like $19.99. And then it used to be years ago, let's say 10 years ago, you could run a profitable as seen on TV campaign. So that was a business. That $60 per order would more than pay for your media cost per order. Obviously on a strong item, the more people are buying, the better the metrics are. But that would pay for the cost of media. That would pay for all your fulfillment and cost of goods stuff. And at the end, you have a profit per order and multiply that by, all the thousands of orders that came in. These days, it's media has more than tripled in the last decade, the cost of media. Many other factors are at play that are affecting the economics. So most of the major players, when they roll out a campaign, they two common things. They'll either make money in the beginning and then end up giving it all back in advertising subsidies later to support their retail campaign, or they will just start off from a position of break even, maybe even a little worse than break even, and just calculate that based on however many products they're going to sell at retail, it makes sense to lose X. It's still a very efficient model in that you're getting some kind of ROI on your advertising spend. But a lot of these people start off from like I said, a break even or a loss position, and they just know they're going to make it up at retail. Something like 90% of all sales and revenue comes from retail these days. So it's mainly a retail play.
And that's something that's very, very interesting that I'm sure a lot of people had no understanding or even thought process around, is the actual the conscious product life cycle that things go through. So you've got the people coming to you with this idea for a no-spill coffee cup holder for your fishing rod, but they're obviously thinking about just making money off the front end with that product and that product only. So there's obviously, I'm guessing, when people come to you with a good front end idea, a lot of massaging and sculpting and work to figure out what the back end of the metrics are going to be. Is that a fair assumption?
So there's a couple things that I want to address that you said. One of them is the idea that an inventor comes with an idea to a company. See, that's a romantic vision of what happens, but absolutely. In reality, inventor items are. Someone did an analysis recently that I was part of, and we found that that's a small percentage. Let's say 15% of where items come from. Most items come from other channels where they've shown success at selling, and the experienced people in this business know that item is going to be compatible with our audience. That's an appeal to our audience. So they just bring it over. I'm sorry?
So like the catalog sort of example you were talking about before? Is that
catalogs are number one. Yeah. It used to be much more of the live shopping channels, QVC and HSN, much less these days because they've sort of changed their model toward more branded products and away from brand new items that they build a business on. So it used to be QVC and HSN were number one. Now it's catalogs. There are many catalogs. Like everything else, 80% comes from 20 catalogs or whatever. But They're a catalog. Catalog is the number one source of new products. You have some international is in that mix. Items that did well in the UK or Australia even. There was recently a product that was it's a mesh screen with magnets in the middle. So it's sort of like an automatically opening and closing screen door, mesh screen door.
Yep.
I actually wrote the commercial for that product, but that came from Australia.
Oh, very cool.
But catalog is the big one, definitely, by far, these days.
Yeah. And the other thing is that's obviously the start of the life cycle. And again, you're kind of saying before that the biggest bang and the real profit in the business is in the retail side of things. And that's something people probably don't really realise is that obviously the life cycle is to try and get that product off the TV and onto the shelves of like a Walmart or a Walgreens or Target and things like that. Is that sort of the long-term goal for the majority of this sort of product?
Absolutely. If there's no retail play, this is particular to short form. Long form, in long form, you can charge higher prices because you have more time to sort of convince people to buy a $60, $100, even more sometimes type item like think a vacuum, an Oric vacuum, for example. You can convince somebody to buy an Oric vacuum, which is a high ticket item in a long form, and therefore long form can be a profitable business model on its own with only direct sales. But in short form, if there's not a retail play, the item is not pursued. Because it's all about retail. And it used to be, like I said, you could be profitable on TV with short form and then wait 6 months and then go to retail and have a whole second wave of even larger profitability. These days, that's collapsed. I mean, people are showing items to retailers before they've even tested on TV, just so they're in the door and they're prepared in the event that it is a successful item. But immediately on the shelves at retail. And really, if you think about it, it's really about capitalizing on the impressions. When I started in the business, I think the rule of thumb was only 10% of people will buy off TV. 90% will only buy it if it's in a retail store near them. These days, as I've measured it periodically in sort of fuzzy ways, that number's gone down to 7% the last time I looked at it. So the pool of people that will buy direct, and I don't really include internet. Internet's kind of a whole separate piece, interesting separate piece in that. But as far as the phone goes, calling that 1-800 number and buying off of TV, that number is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So really it's all about retail these days and buying and an efficient way to buy impressions on TV. We get special rates in DRTV, and we also get those sales that help subsidize the campaign.
Oh, very cool. Because I think that's, again, a lot of people don't really realize is that it is very much a conscious decision to actually drive foot traffic somewhat into the stores and have the products in the stores from day one, which is very, very cool. So in terms of the format, you're talking about sort of obviously, getting people to call the 1-800 number, and obviously that is the call to action, which is, in my opinion, what direct response is all about, getting people to actually respond directly to the actual call to action. And this is what's different to sort of a lot of TV commercials out there, obviously, is where it's just like brand building and just like, hey, buy a Coke. It's not like go and do this right now. Besides, obviously, the actual having to have the call to action, which is what defines it as DRTV. What is some of the tried and true techniques or structures to actually put into an overarching, short form DRTV commercial?
Some of the techniques for the call to action.
Oh no, just the structure of the actual whole piece of.
The structure of the commercial. Yeah. So I also have a list around that. I'm a big list guy, I guess, when it comes to these things. So I once condensed it into 10. The tried and true 10 I call it, because I really once again got it from experts, icons, and books that go back 100 years. But when I write a commercial, almost all the time, with rare exceptions, we start with the problem solution opening. So, earlier in the product criteria, I said it has to solve a problem. The job of the commercial is to articulate that problem right away. And if you ever watched a commercial, I'm sure you've seen how ridiculous we get with the whole black and white. Oh no, and some of the over the top DR cheese, we call it, and expressing the problem. But that's how you open up the commercial. And then the structure from there is really to I'll just give a couple of highlights and guidelines. What we like to do, because 30-second advertising is the dominant format, my theory that I hold to and that we tend to follow is you want to communicate to the viewer, what the product is, what it does, and why it's different in those first 30 seconds. If you don't achieve that, you're probably going to lose their attention span, because their attention span is trained to be about 30 seconds. So we introduce a problem, introduce a product as a solution, and try to explain what it is, what it does, and why it's different in those first 30 seconds. The rest of the commercial, the body of the commercial, the last 30 seconds is going to be all the build up to the call to action and the sense of urgency and all the stuff. I'll talk about that in a minute. But in the middle, really what we're trying to do is build credibility by demonstrating the product repeatedly. If the product lends itself to, and many times it does, some sort of what we call a magic demonstration, like, the most famous example was OxyClean when they were starting out. Billy Mays used to have this giant tank of red iodine, and he would dump OxyClean into it, and it'd swirl around, and the water would turn clear. That's a magical demo, and so if there is a magical demo, we definitely make that the sort of the center of the commercial. But a lot of product demonstrations, a lot of times, if it's something technical or something interesting inside the product, we'll do an animation. Think sort of like a Pixar-esque animation that kind of shows you inside the product, or
the pause
or something,
of
the science
acne
of it.
getting pulled out. That's probably the one that comes to mind for me. Is you see every acne ad has that cartoon of how it actually cleans out the pores and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So we'll have that in there. Here's how it works. The what's happening beneath the surface sort of thing. That'll be in there. A lot of times, if it's particularly, you mentioned acne. In acne, you're talking about liquid in a bottle. So a large part of acne commercials are testimonials. Before and after. So you see the person's acne before and how much better it's gotten after. So they'll have a lot of those split screen things, but also people talking to you in a very credible way about how it changed their life, and they were a horrible troll and now they're gorgeous and they get dates left and right, stuff like that. And then you're pretty much into so that's sort of the middle of the commercial, the demonstrations, the testimonials, endorsements if there's a person associated. Oftentimes it's a doctor or some professional that endorses it, but we've also had celebrity endorsements in the creative. And then the end of it is really sort of presenting the offer. We use techniques like we call it a value comparison or value compare. You could pay $100 for this, ceramic pan, but today you only pay, $20. Things like that. And that pretty much starts the offer process. You introduce the price. You introduce, of course, a bonus of some kind. These days, the most common bonus is a second one, free. But usually there's some sort of processing and handling attached to that, but quote unquote free. It's less common, but definitely in times past there would be some other little kind of item, that premium item that you would include. We use so we'll present the item, a value comparison, the price of the product. Then we'll present a bonus, or we'll double it, something like that, and then we'll present oftentimes a guarantee of some sort. If it ever breaks for any reason, we'll replace it free of charge, or satisfaction sort of guarantee. Kind of. So we use those, essentially those kind of techniques to close. And the language is very sense of urgency. Call now, call right now. We used to be able to say call in the next 10 minutes, but because they don't actually cut it off after 10 minutes, the FTC said you can't do that anymore. So you'll see that less and less. But techniques to this offer is not available in stores. And most times it isn't available because you can't go to the store and buy two. You can only buy one. Supplies are limited is a famous one, but supplies are always limited, so I don't know about the truth of that one. I guess it's true of all products. You're always limited in your goods, particularly in the beginning. So we'll say supplies are limited. Things like that. To create a sense of urgency. So that's the language, and that's pretty much the offer structure, and that's the whole structure. That formula that I've just laid out, sort of in a very fast way, is if you take any SC on TV commercial, it'll usually break down into that sort of formula, that sort of 3-act play, if you will. The problem, solution, opening, what it is, what it does. The body of the commercial, which is a lot of demonstrations, magic demonstration if you have it, testimonials, and then the third act, which is the offer and really building up the value and creating that sense of urgency to call now.
So you mentioned obviously as seen on TV sort of stuff. So what are sort of, I guess, your top 3 or 4 that come to mind? Great DRTV commercial people might be able to Google or look on YouTube to get a bit of a feel for this sort of stuff. What are some of your favourites?
My favorite commercials?
Yeah.
I mean, anything with Billy Mays, the big ones, Mighty Putty, OxyClean. Billy Mays is the late great Billy Mays. He's no longer with us, but he was at the top of the profession when he was alive, and really, sort of set the standard for everyone else. And really, when he died, it sort of left a void, because there are other pitchmen, and some of them are quite good, but no one was at that level, Yeah. So if you go back in DRTV history, you're talking about anything with Billy Mays in it. That was a
and there's a great TV series which is available on Netflix and stuff like called Pitchmen, which Billy featured in.
Yes, right. Billy did 2 seasons with Anthony Sullivan, who's another good pitchman from the UK that's been in many things. He sort of picked up the mantle. They were friends, and he does all the OxyClean stuff now as well. Mighty Putty, Mighty Mend It. There's 2 Mighty products. OxyClean. Those are probably the most famous Billy Mays ones. If you're just talking about commercials there, and then sort of, I guess, to bring that forward, if you want to talk about great pitchmen, there's a new, relatively new guy called Mark Gill, and he's famous for the Perfect Brownie, the Grout Bully. These are active campaigns now that you can see him in, but he's sort of picked up that mantle finally after a few years and become the top pitchman, and a lot of his stuff follows that classic format. It's representative of the best that the industry has to offer. So anything with Mark Gill in it. Grout Bully is the one at the top of my mind that people have probably seen or could Google and find relatively easily. The
thing about pitchmen that really, sorry to cut you off there, the thing about pitchmen that really surprised me when I first started researching and getting into this space and learning what I could sort of swipe and deploy from this area of direct response marketing to other areas was that a lot of the people you actually see as the face of the commercial, like Billy Mays, for example, is also the actual brains behind the operation, for want of a better term. He's not just the camera face, he's actually the guy putting the whole deal together as well, and doing the marketing and doing a lot of the sculpting of the offers and the actual pitch itself. Yeah,
to some extent, right. So, obviously, reality TV is paradoxically not always real, and, I work with Billy in many projects, and he was hands-on involved in helping to craft the offers and stuff like that. Because when you come together to create a commercial, you have a writer, but the guy that's going to be saying the lines, particularly if he's Billy Mays, is going to have a lot of input. And Billy was very, very well versed, did have his own product finding company, so he knew a lot about it. But for the most part, the projects that Billy worked on, he was a pitch guy for hire. And the same thing of Anthony Sullivan. The only guy that truly fits that definition would be Vince Offer, the ShamWow guy, because he's only ever pitched his own products that he discovered, cultivated, brought all together through a company called Square One. And speaking of great commercials, if you go back and watch the ShamWow commercial, I mean that when that came out, there was a lot of negative conversation in the industry about the quality of the video. But when I saw it, I said, this guy's obviously a pitch man. He obviously gets the fundamentals of what makes a business work. Because if you watch that commercial today, the first thing he'll say is, what did this guy shoot on a $5,000 budget? And that's not far from the truth. But the second thing you realize is that it's very well structured and very entertaining, and it just draws you in, because Vince knew exactly what he was doing from all of his years in the pitch market, and made a great commercial. I was a big fan of that commercial, and since then the quality has gotten very high. He spent Hollywood budgets on his most recent commercial, The Sticky, but if you go back to that first commercial, it's got everything there. It's got everything there.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Speaking of actually kind of, I guess talking about what a good commercial is and what makes it up, I really enjoy your blog, which I'd love to sort of talk about really quickly, because I think a lot of people should, chuck this in their RSS reader, because you do a great job of, every few days. Do you have a schedule of this, or just every sort of randomly you post? Do you have a schedule with your posts?
I try to. Thank you, by the way. I try to post once a week, but there's no set schedule. I basically collect a folder of new items that I get through various sources of information, and when I have the time, I sit down and I'm a little obsessive about it. So I try to review every new thing that comes out, and obviously that can be I don't really monetize the blog in any way. It's I guess it goes back to my journalism days. I try to be objective, and so I don't monetize in any way. So it ends up being a lot of work that's taking away from paying work. But yeah, so I try to do it once a week and try to keep current, because I personally I like to review these things and stay abreast of what's going on in the business.
Yeah. So to give some context to the listeners, the blog's at skymark.blogspot.com.
Yeah. It's SCIMARK .blogspot.com.
And the really sorry, go ahead.
The name is actually pronounced Cymark because it's a variation of we spoke about Claude Hopkins earlier. He wrote a book called Scientific Advertising.
Yeah.
So when I named my company, I named it Scientific Marketing, Cymark for short. So it's cymark.blogspot.com.
Very cool. Because what you actually do, to give some context to everybody, is you actually pull apart different short form DRTV advertising. So you actually talk about what the description is, what the main pitch is, the price point, the bonuses, who's behind it, a website, whether you think it's going to actually succeed or not, and then obviously break down some of the key reasons for that analysis, which I think is really, really cool. So it's actually giving people the opportunity to actually start thinking as a marketer, thinking as an advertiser. So when they actually go and see these DRTV spots on their TV box, they actually can start thinking the way you're thinking, going, okay, this is what makes this work, this is what doesn't, actually can start using that, which I think is really, really cool.
Oh, yeah, thanks for the plug. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's interesting. The blog started out as an email when I was at the first company I worked for in the industry, and we used to receive receive all this information about new items that were coming out, and nobody ever really looked at it. And I like to do my homework, as I mentioned earlier, so I would start watching it, and then I would send out little email summaries, and then I added like pithy commentary, and people from sister companies got on the list, and it became this sort of unwieldy email list. And then people would ask me, like, a year ago you reviewed this thing, and we're looking at a similar item. We can't remember what it is. Can you go dig in your email archives and find it? And of course, it's very difficult to do in some of these email programs. So one day I got the bright idea that everybody's using these blog things now. Maybe I should start to embrace the modern technology and I started doing it strictly as a research tool, to be able to say to people, hey, if you want to go back a year, just go on this blog, and you can search it now. It's fully searchable. It's a Google blog, so it's easy to search. Go ahead and do your own research, and then it just kind of grew from there into a life of its own.
Very, very cool. Well, one final question I'd like to ask everyone we have on the show, whether it's Tim Ferriss or yourself, is what's the one question I haven't asked you that I should have about short-form direct response TV?
One question you should have asked me that you didn't ask me. I don't know. I have to think about that one for a minute.
Is there anything else that you think people should know about direct response TV that we haven't really discussed that people often ask about or should be aware of?
I guess to your credit, you covered most of the questions that people will initially ask. Consumers in particular always want to know what the deal is with the double processing and handling charges, the buy one get one frees that aren't really free, and the answer to that question is that we, if you begin to understand the model, you begin to understand why it's necessary, and of course it's all disclosed these days. But the real reason why everybody does it is because that it's been so hugely successful. It's a strange thing about consumer psychology. If you'll put something on the air and you'll say, I'll give you 2 of these for $20, you'll get X amount of calls. And then if you say, I'll give you 2 of these for $10, but I'm going to charge you double shipping and handling, you'll get 2x. And there's so many little interesting things about human psychology that I've learned from direct response, and that's one of them. It's just by shuffling things around, even if you're fully upfront with people, which we are, you'll get twice the response that you would have gotten had you said it another way. Yeah, so that's actually true, and I've seen it many times. I'll give you 2 for $20, 1 shipping and handling, or 2 for $10 with 2 shipping and handlings, and if you do the math, it works out the same exact way, but you'll get twice the amount of response from a $10 offer. So
it all comes down to testing, doesn't it?
That's why.
It all comes down to testing.
Right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Obviously, Claude Hopkins, fantastic. We've spoken about him on the show and his books before. What other sort of are your favourite books that you've read around just direct response marketing?
Okay, that's an easy one. Again, Claude Hopkins, My Life in Advertising and Scientific Advertising. Yep. If you want to go way back to the fundamentals, he wrote in the 1920s, I want to say. Yeah. Moving forward in time, very relevant to our business is David Ogilvy's work. So, Ogilvy on Advertising is a must-read. There's a guy from around that same time period called Ross or Reeves, who wrote a book called off the top of my head I can't Reality in Advertising, which is an excellent 1950s, 1960s, very insightful book about consumer psychology that applies. Also, Tested Advertising Methods by a guy named Caples, Caples. That's a must-read book for direct response selling. And then as you go forward in time, in the 80s and 90s, a guy named Joseph Sugarman.
Yep. Blue Blockers.
Wrote a series of books. Yeah, I have all those books. They were very helpful to me, particularly in
is one of my favorite books. Triggers is one of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah, Triggers. Yeah, excellent book. I have that. And Ron Popeil also wrote a book called Salesman of the Century, which is a great book to read about the pitch and how the whole thing developed.
Ron Popeil, he was the slow cooker, the chicken roaster.
Ron Popeil. So he's famous for the long form side of the business, but he did the Showtime rotisserie, many products over the years. Yeah, there's some fun ones in there in his book. So he covers basically his whole life story, which includes a lot of details about all the various products that he tested and what he learned along the way. Salesman of the Century. That's a great book. And I don't think I've forgotten anything. There are a handful of other ones, but yeah, those are the main ones.
Very, very cool, Jordan. Well, mate, thank you so much for your time today. It's been awesome for a lot of people. I think this has been very, very educational, and I've really enjoyed it as well, mate. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Good speaking with you.
You've been enjoying another fine episode of PreneurCast with Pete Williams and Dom Gosher. Make sure to hang out with the boys online at PreneurMedia.tv or drop them a line via PreneurCast@PreneurGroup.com.